Your legacy is preserved in the amber glow of the choices you make today, waiting to be revealed in the future. Explore the powerful narratives of fate and the lessons that define who we are destined to become. Click subscribe now and build your eternal legacy.
Son-in-law handed me a piece of paper across the kitchen table like he was doing me a favor. "Just read it," he said. "It's straightforward." I looked down. It was a quitclaim deed. My name at the top. My house. The house I'd lived in for 31 years. I folded it in half and set it back down in front of him. "No," I said. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. More like the laugh you give a child who says something silly. "Maureen, come on. You're 63 years old. You live alone in a 4-bedroom house. My wife and I need the space." "You've got more house than you need." My daughter was standing by the sink, not looking at me. "I want you to remember that part." She was standing by the sink and she was not looking at me. Let me back up. My name is Maureen. I raised my daughter, Tessa, by myself after her father left when she was 4. I worked as a bookkeeper for 22 years, got my CPA license at 38 while Tessa was in middle school, and eventually built a small accounting firm of my own. Nothing glamorous. 6 employees, a strip of office space off Route 9, and a client list that grew slowly and steadily the way things do when you don't cut corners. I drove a 12-year-old Buick. I bought clothes at Marshall's. I kept a coupon folder in my purse, the accordion kind, organized by category. My neighbor's teenage son once saw it and said, "No offense, Mrs. Calloway, but that's kind of sad." I told him it meant I'd never had to borrow money in my life, and he could think about that. Tessa knew I was careful with money. She grew up watching me clip coupons, pack lunches, turn off lights in empty rooms. What she didn't know, what I'd never told her because I didn't think it was her business, because I'd wanted her to build her own life without looking over her shoulder at mine, was that the firm had done very, very well. I owned the building the firm operated out of. I owned the building next to it. I owned a small apartment complex in the next town over that I'd bought at auction in 2008, when everything was falling apart and people thought I was out of my mind. I had held on to all of it quietly through a property management LLC that bore no resemblance to my name. On paper, I was a retired bookkeeper in a 4-bedroom house. In practice, I was worth somewhere north of $4 million. I hadn't told Tessa any of this, not because I was hiding it from her, but because I'd learned a long time ago that money changes how people treat you. I'd seen it happen to others. I didn't want to be treated differently by my own child. I wanted her to call me on Sundays because she loved me, not because she was keeping me warm for an inheritance. Maybe that was naive. Maybe I should have told her. But then again, if I'd told her, I never would have found out what I found out. Tessa met Brandon 3 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. He was a sales director for a software company, which as far as I could tell meant he talked loudly on the phone and took a lot of flights. He wore nice shoes and had very white teeth and called me Maureen from the first day we met, which was fine, I suppose, but felt deliberate somehow. I didn't dislike him right away. That's important to say. I tried. He was charming in the beginning. He'd help clear the table at dinner and ask me questions about myself that sounded like real questions. But over time, after they got married, after they moved into the townhouse they were renting 20 minutes from me, I started to notice things. The way he'd glance at my coupon folder and say nothing, but the corner of his mouth would twitch. The way he'd mention, just casually, in the middle of other conversations, how expensive things had gotten, how hard it was to save, how some people just didn't plan for the future. One Thanksgiving, he brought up a neighbor of his parents who had stayed too long in a house she couldn't manage. He looked at me while he said it. I looked back at him. I said, "The turkey's getting cold." Tessa laughed too hard at that, the way she'd been laughing too hard at things he said for about a year by then. The quitclaim deed appeared 8 months after they got married. Before that, there had been a series of smaller conversations. Conversations I understand now were preparation. Brandon asking about my retirement plan. Brandon mentioning casually that his company had a great elder care package for employees' parents. Brandon suggesting that Tess and I should have a real talk about the future. I deflected all of them, not because I was hiding anything, but because I found them presumptuous. I was 63, not 83. I paid my own bills. I shoveled my own walk. Then came the paper. Maureen, he said when I told him no, we're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to help you. This house is too big. The upkeep alone. I handle the upkeep, I said. For now, he said. Tessa was still standing by the sink. I looked at her and I said, do you want me to sign this? She finally looked at me. Mom, she said, it would just make things easier. Easier for who? I said. She didn't answer. I picked up the paper, took it upstairs to my bedroom, and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that night, not crying. I want to be clear about that. I have never been a person who cried easily, and I wasn't about to start over a piece of paper. But I was sitting with something heavy, something I didn't quite have words for yet. My daughter had stood in my kitchen and asked me to hand over my house. She hadn't said no to him. She hadn't said, Brandon, she just got here for dinner. Maybe this isn't the time. She'd stood by the sink and looked away and then looked at me and said it would make things easier. I kept thinking about those words. Make things easier. For them? Easier how? They had a townhouse they were renting at a perfectly reasonable rate. They both had incomes. There was no crisis I was aware of. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Edward, and he has handled my affairs for 15 years, and he is the kind of man who does not panic and does not rush, and has never once made me feel foolish for asking a question. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, do you want me to look into their finances? I said yes. It took Edward 2 weeks to get me a full picture. Brandon's software company had been through 2 rounds of layoffs. He'd survived both, but his base salary had been cut and his bonus structure changed. Their rent had gone up significantly at renewal. They had taken out 2 personal loans in the past 18 months. They weren't destitute, but they weren't comfortable. And they had apparently decided that the solution was my house. I sat with this for another week. I went to work. I had lunch with my friend Constance on Thursday the way I always do. I watered my tomato plants. I did not call Tessa. She called me on Sunday like usual. Mom, are you okay? You seemed distant. I'm fine, I said. Just busy. Brandon feels bad about the other night, she said. He just worries about you. I know, I said. He really does care, Mom. I'm sure he does, I said. And I got off the phone and went back to thinking. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened next. I am not a vengeful person. I have never been. I believe in proportionate responses, and I believe in giving people the opportunity to correct themselves. And I believe that most situations can be resolved if everyone involved is honest. But I also believe in consequences. And I had been watching for 8 months a slow and deliberate effort to maneuver me out of my own house. It hadn't been one conversation, it had been a campaign. The elder care comments, the planning for the future remarks, the nudges and glances and sighs, and finally a legal document produced at a dinner table. That wasn't worry. That was strategy. So I made some calls. The first call was to Edward. I asked him to prepare a full accounting of my assets, not for anyone else, just for me. I wanted everything clearly documented. He had it to me by end of week. The second call was to my property manager, a very capable woman named Dolores who has worked with me for 12 years. I asked her to flag any lease renewals coming up in the next 6 months. There were 3. I told her I'd be reviewing the terms myself. The third call I'll get to in a moment. What I hadn't told you yet is that Brandon's company, the one he worked for, the one whose fortunes had fallen, had recently moved their regional office into a building off Route 9. My building. I found this out from Dolores, who mentioned it in passing during our call. Oh, and that software firm renewed their lease last spring. 3-year term, good tenants. I said, what's the name of the company? She told me. I sat very still for a moment. I asked her to send me the lease documents. I want to be honest. My first feeling was not satisfaction. It was something closer to sadness. I thought about Tessa at 4 years old, dragging her blanket down the hallway to my room during thunderstorms. I thought about her at 16, the night she didn't make the volleyball team, sitting in the car with me in the driveway for an hour because she didn't want to go inside yet. I thought about how much I had wanted for her and how hard I had tried, and how somewhere along the way something had gotten confused about money, about worth, about what love was supposed to look like. I didn't want to hurt my daughter, but I also wasn't going to give her my house. The Sunday after I reviewed the lease documents, I invited them to dinner. I made pot roast, which Tessa has loved since she was a child. I set the table nicely. I did not bring up the deed. We talked about their vacation plans and a show they were watching and the neighbor's dog that barked too much. Brandon seemed relaxed. He'd probably decided I was coming around. After dinner, I poured decaf and I said, "I've been thinking about your proposal." Brandon leaned forward slightly. "I'm not signing the house over," I said, "but I do think we should all be more transparent with each other." He started to say something. I said, "Let me finish." He stopped. "I've been running a small property management company for the last 14 years, I said. "I should have told you both sooner. I apologize for that. I own a few properties in the area." I paused. "Including the building where your office is located, Brandon." The silence was interesting. Tessa looked at me. Brandon looked at me. Then Brandon looked at Tessa. "I'm not saying this as a threat," I said, and I meant it. "I'm saying it because I think honesty matters. You asked me to be more open about my future plans. I'm being open. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving into any elder care facility. I'm not signing over my home. And I think it's time we all understood each other clearly." Brandon said, "You own our building?" "My LLC does, yes," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks," I said. "Dolores mentioned it." Another silence. Then, very quietly, he said, "I didn't know." "I understand that," I said. "I want to tell you what happened after because I think it matters." Tessa called me the next morning. She'd been crying, I could tell. She said, "Mom, I didn't know about any of that either. The money, the properties." I had no idea. I said, "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" I thought carefully before I answered. "Because I wanted you to love me without a reason," I said. "That probably wasn't fair to you. I'm sorry." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I should have said no when he brought that paper to dinner. I should have said, not tonight, not like this. I knew it was wrong and I didn't say anything." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. I'm sorry, Mom. There are moments in a relationship, any relationship, where you can feel the thing shifting back toward something real. This was one of those moments. I recognized it the way you recognize a smell from childhood. Something old and true underneath all the accumulated confusion. I know you are," I said. Brandon and I had a separate conversation, just the two of us, the following week. He was uncomfortable, which was appropriate. He's a proud man and he'd been wrong and he knew it. He said, "I want you to know I wasn't trying to take advantage of you." I said, "I think you were, actually. Even if you didn't think of it that way. I think you looked at me and saw someone you could manage. Someone who'd go along with things if you pushed the right way." I said it evenly, without heat. "I understand finances were stressful, but that was the wrong answer." He didn't argue. "I'm not your adversary," I said. "I never was. I want Tessa to be happy. I want you both to be stable. But I am not a resource to be organized. I'm a person, and I needed you to know that." He nodded. I think he genuinely heard me. People are capable of that when you don't give them room to be defensive. His company's lease renewed, by the way, at the same rate. I want to be clear about that too. There's something I've been thinking about since all of this happened. Not just about Brandon and Tessa, but about the larger thing. The thing underneath it. I hid my life from my daughter. I thought I was protecting something. Protecting the relationship from the distortion that money creates. And maybe I was, partly, but I also took something away from her, which was the chance to know her mother fully. Not just the woman with the coupon folder and the 12-year-old Buick, but the woman who built something from nothing and held on to it quietly for 3 decades. She deserved to know that woman. So did I. I've been more open since then. We have dinner every other Sunday now, and sometimes Brandon comes, and sometimes it's just us. And we talk more honestly than we ever have. About money, about fear, about what we each thought the other one was. She told me recently that she used to worry I was lonely, that I didn't have enough, that she'd failed me somehow by not being closer, not checking in more, not making sure I was okay. I said, "You should have asked me." She said, "I should have." And I said, "I should have told you more." We sat with that for a moment, both of us. Then she said, "So what else don't I know about you?" And I laughed, and she laughed, and I said, "Pour another cup of coffee. We've got time." I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong, and when. It wasn't the night Brandon put that paper on my table. That was just the moment everything became visible. What went wrong happened earlier, slowly, in the small decisions I made over years to stay quiet about who I was and what I'd built. I thought I was being humble. But somewhere along the way, my silence created a blank space, and other people filled it in with their own version of me. Someone manageable, someone who could be nudged, someone whose future could be arranged without her input. That's the thing about hiding yourself, even with good intentions. The world doesn't leave that space empty. It invents something to put there instead. I don't blame Tessa entirely. She watched me clip coupons for 20 years. She saw the old car and the Marshall's bags in the coupon folder, and she drew a conclusion. I let her draw it. I thought she'd love me more that way, love me purely, without the complication of money in the picture. What I didn't understand was that I was also denying her the full truth of who her mother was, a woman who had built something from nothing, who had made smart decisions for 3 decades, who was more than capable of managing her own life. She deserved to know that woman. I kept her from her. And Brandon, I think he was simply doing what people do when they're scared and prideful and looking for an easy answer. He saw what looked like an easy answer. He was wrong about almost everything, but the fear underneath it was real. That doesn't make what he did acceptable. It makes it human. Those are different things, and I've learned it matters to know the difference. What I keep coming back to is this. The actions we take toward other people tend to come back to us in some form, not as punishment, but as consequence. Brandon treated me like someone without agency, and then discovered I had more agency than he'd imagined. That wasn't luck or irony. That was just the natural result of building something real over a long period of time and then being underestimated by someone who hadn't done the same work. Resilience isn't something you talk about. It's something you accumulate quietly in the years when no one is watching. Every decision I made to stay solvent, to reinvest, to hold on to what I'd built, even when it wasn't glamorous, that was resilience. It didn't announce itself. It just sat there, solid, until the moment it was needed. And the honesty, that's the part I got wrong and had to correct. Not Brandon's honesty, mine. I owed Tessa more truth than I gave her. I owed her the full picture of who I was. Not because she needed my money, but because she needed her mother, the real one. When I finally gave her that, things shifted. Not perfectly, not overnight, but genuinely. That's the only kind of shift that lasts. The Sunday dinners we have now are different from the ones before. We talk about real things. She asks real questions. I give real answers. It took a deed on a kitchen table and 3 phone calls and 1 very uncomfortable dinner to get here. But we got here. I'd rather have this than the comfortable distance we had before. I think she would too.